I'd now like to introduce Siddharth Das, who is the co-founder and CEO of Univ.AI. Now, Siddharth is one of the most creative people I know, and I will read out the formal introduction, but I have to say this about him that every time we raise the bar, it's somewhere or the other there's Siddharth pushing us to do it. Because I know that by the end of it, he'll probably even say that maybe the introduction wasn't creative enough. The whole reason is because apart from being the co-founder and CEO, Siddharth is himself someone who tinkers with a lot of stuff. And not like the tinkerer, I think that you mentioned, Asatang, but someone who creates.
That's a good tinker.
That's a good tinker. Also, and so he's built a music system of his own. He's in fact designed and built a music system. He has designed his own house. And I don't know how he finds time to do so much, but before Univ.AI, Siddharth has served as the CEO of Reliance Jio Money, the fintech arm of Jio. Earlier, he was the COO of PayZippy, which was Flipkart's first payments business in India, and COO of CRIF Highmark, India's leading credit bureau focused on credit for the underprivileged. And one of the things that I have to say when introducing Siddharth is that he's always telling us to be more zippy, to be more exciting about everything that we do. And one of the reasons why this conference was designed the way that it is because we wanted to bring exciting and what I would love to say, cool people together in one room to interact, to network, to learn from each other, and also create a community around this exciting field that is data science. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Siddharth, who's going to be moderating the question answers, and then also will be speaking after Asatang as our next speaker. All yours, Siddharth. I'll just say the topic that Siddharth is going to be speaking on is something which is close to his heart, the most important career skill you can ever have. So we're switching gears now. All over to you, Siddharth.
All right. So before I bring up my I'll structure this as a workshop. So guys, request, and men and women and everyone else, request that I ask questions and you raise hands in answer to every question so we can do a quick count, right? So as a quick backgrounder, I've spent a huge part of my life, and that's now huge because I went to MIT in circa 1995-96, right? So that's now 22 years plus 5, 27 years. And so that's a long, long time. And luckily, by the virtue of that education, I found myself at the top of an organization almost right after graduate school. So as a 26-year-old, I was running a bunch of 70 people in a US company, and in the unenviable position of having to interview, assess, hire, figure out. And by the way, I was woefully underprepared for that. There was nothing in my resume, my education that should suggest, despite the fantastic MIT education and before that at Roorkee that I received, there's nothing that prepared me for that, right? Now, suddenly, all the parameters of my training had changed. Now, suddenly, I was in the business of trying to figure out who is going to get me to the task I have ahead of me. And how do they work together? How do this set of 70 people work together to deliver us to a destination? As a person straight out of school, you can imagine an extremely difficult problem that I'd never thought about before. Somebody who's perhaps been a captain of a sports team or something like that has at least had a chance to think about how to put together a team to achieve an objective. I had never done that before, right? Other than school projects and things like that. So from that point onwards, for more than 20 years now, I've spent, except for the last 2 or 3 years at Univ.AI, where I've not interviewed that many people, I've talked to, interviewed, assessed, promoted, fired, hired, literally thousands of people, more than 2,000 people. And I've probably interviewed 3,000 to 4,000 people, right? And so the key question that a lot of people, naturally, inevitably ask a person like me who's had a chance to lead rather large organizations, small organizations, build a company, sell a company, is how should one see success and what does it take to succeed, right? And you know that hundreds of books have been written about that. You know, this elusive quality called success. What is it to be a great leader? What is it to be a great manager? So I have my own take at it, probably flavored by my own experiences. But so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask questions. In response to each question, just raise your hand so we can do a count, and that will let us come to some kind of conclusion. Okay. So I'm going to now share a screen. Okay. You can also see my margin screen. So let me change the view so that you see slideshow. All right. Now, question number one, how many of you are working professionals here? So
Please use the
yeah.
chat box to record your answers.
No, actually what happens is when people raise hands, Sudhindra, we see a number, a count. So that works. So we are right now up to 20 out of roughly 220, 225, because the rest of us are Univ.AI staffers. And okay, the speed at which this is going, I guess the number is 10 to 15%. All right. So the view from which you are looking at my question is as a student, which is a little out of context. So the way to see this then is, what the future might look like if you understand certain things, right? So you can unraise your hands and then raise your hands for the next question. And we have two questions coming up, right? I want you to answer how you think of yourself. And I've given you two words which possibly are not mutually exclusive in the sense that you could be both. But I want you to choose one. If you had to overwhelmingly describe yourself, what is the type that you will call yourself? So let's go with the first one, smart. How many of you think you are smart rather than reliable? Yeah. We'll wait 30 seconds roughly to get a sense of the answer, right? So folks, do not participate, because otherwise this exercise will fail, right? So we have only 30 people who've said they are smart, which would lead me to the conclusion that there are about 200 others who think they're reliable. But I think when I ask the question, we'll get a very different answer. So please unmark your raised hands so that we can ask the next question now. Yeah. So how many of you think of yourself as reliable? Okay, slightly less for loyal. So most of you think you are long-term thinkers. All right, let's get to the next one, next screen. Communicators versus creators. Creators sit and build in a lab or maybe on a screen. They write graphics, they build tools. Communicators communicate ideas. Typically great CEOs are great communicators. How many of you think of yourselves as communicators, good communicators, as opposed to good creators? So I'd say roughly about 45. And how many of you think of yourselves as creators? Wow, that number's shooting. So give or take 65. All right, 67. Let's make that 70. That's coming up with the last panel of sort of categorical qualities. A doer versus a thinker. How many of you think of yourselves as doers? Okay, 50-ish. Now, how many of you think of yourselves as thinkers? Okay, so 60-ish. All right. Now let's collect our counts a little bit. Yeah. What happened here? I'll have to do an ESC. I'll stop the screen share for a bit and I'll reshare it. Go ahead. Okay. We'll get back into edit mode and share the screen. Sudhanshu, you got the numbers for me?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. How many super smart people we have in the audience?
30.
Okay. How many very strategic long-term thinkers do we have?
60.
How many?
60. 60.
Okay. And how many creators do we have? Creative
70.
people.
70.
And how many thinking type do we have?
60. 60 again.
How many extremely reliable people do we have?
80. 80.
How many loyal people do we have?
45.
Okay. Communicators.
Again, 45.
Okay. I think we'll call it COM because communications
Yeah.
kind of long. Okay, and
50. Door.
doers.
5050.
Yeah, I'm just trying to highlight that. So we have 50. All right.
Yeah.
Cool. So now my question is that imagine all of you are the hiring chief of hiring, HR, or CEO of a very large company like Reliance, right? And you're trying to tell your head of actually you're the CEO and trying to tell the head of HR to pick between a larger personality type for most sort of senior positions in the company, right? And what do you think? So if you call column 1 as number 1 and column 2 as number 2, these are the sets of sort of grouping characteristics in this way. Who would you say you want as leaders in your company? And let's have a show of hands for those who would pick number 1. Okay, I think I didn't even give you context. My screen wasn't visible so far. So number 1 is the first row, smart, strategic, creator, thinker. Number 2 is reliable, loyal. Yeah, so we're asking for votes for the first column, smart, strategic, creator, thinker. Leaders who should be that rather than the second column, right? So we're about 30, give or take. Now vote for people who'd rather pick reliable, loyal, great communicators and doers over smart, strategic, creative thinkers for your leadership. Interesting. So most of you would pick the right-hand column, but most of you are in the left-hand column. So you would actually not qualify. So I find that a rather interesting irony. But let's look at the reality of organizations for a second, right? That if you are a boss, not the absolute boss, the CEO of a 100,000 person, 30,000 person company, who doesn't day to day think about all the people in their company. They think about, where the company is going. But everybody else, if you have to hire somebody under you, directly under you, you may not know it right now, but 9 times out of 10, you will pick the right-hand column. So you guys are instinctively right, because you want to go to sleep at night knowing that when you wake up, whatever you had said should be done yesterday gets done, right? And Asitang pointed out to a data scientist types who creates more problems than answers. And column 1 often delights in thinking. They get off on their own intelligence, right? They love the sound of their voice. They want to show everybody that they are, long-term thinkers. They're great thinkers. They're deep thinkers. They often are not answer-focused. You need that type in your company, but they don't get stuff done. You ideally want people who get stuff done to be closely working with people who can question, who can think. So it's not one type or another type, but unfortunately, you have to go up the ladder. I mean, you start at the bottom, you don't show up at the top, except when you start your own company, right? And so if you do that, then what happens is that you will be hired by somebody, and that somebody is much more likely to value the right-hand column over the left-hand column, right? And also because I think extreme intelligence, good thinkers, trained thinkers are a rare breed. It takes, unlike what you might think, it's 10% gift. A lot of it is just training. How do you become a great, well-trained thinker? And most people are not trained at it. So they get good at it over time. And therefore, you don't find really well-trained thinkers early in their careers. And so given the choice of both, anyone who is a hirer would over time, in theory, they'd want smart people, but in practice, they'd always favor reliable, loyal, sort of doer type people, right? Now, oddly, there's a contradiction here that the number one in a firm or the top few, yeah, they need to have the first column qualities in spades and oodles. Number two people are rarely sort of, great visionaries who would bust the boundaries to take their companies forward or their enterprises of any kind. And yet, every time the person who's getting promoted by their bosses enjoys the qualities in column two. So path to number one is often through number two, and the right column is the set of qualities that are most valued in number two, right? And so how do you think that ever happens? Like, how does a great number two ever become a great number one? So this is not an objective type binary answer. I'd like some of you, to type out an answer on the chat screen. I'd like to hear what you have to say. How does somebody who's intrinsically reliable, loyal, a great communicator, a great doer, actually occupy the position that is required to be occupied by a super smart, highly strategic, creative thinker? Is there a way for people to speak here? Like,
Now people can unmute themselves and speak if they want.
yeah. So if you can unmute yourself and you want to give an answer, please do. And otherwise, we can cover it in the Q&A as well.
Hi, Siddharth. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, this is Amar.
Yeah.
I think the way is to be an entrepreneur.
Well, I mean, that changes the company you're in, but I'm talking about in most companies, to be a great number two, you need to have column two qualities. But to ultimately get to the top, you need to have column one qualities. And so all the leaders in the company are being selected by the enterprise to be column two. But ultimately, somebody who rises to the very top needs to be column one.
Yep.
Hi, Siddharth, Vikas here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that someone who is reliable or loyal will find a way to get things done, and someone who is loyal will ultimately, think about the company. He has to be loyal towards and ultimately start thinking in the long term benefit of the company.
You don't become smart and strategic from loyal and reliable. You just don't, right? That it's hard. Some qualities are gained early in your life, right? You don't suddenly wake up in the middle of your life and become creative, strategic thinkers. You just don't. Why? Because old habits die hard. You become habituated to a certain way of life, a certain way of being. And yes, while it is possible and people do reinvent themselves all the time, it's not often that this happens.
Yeah, we need an organization culture. We need an organization culture which encourages the number one type.
But that will make the organization fail. And number one type do not make an organization run. It's the number two type that make the organization run. And it's very interesting because column number one, we are using both as a metaphor for a leader as well as a thinking type. And column two, we are using as a metaphor for the number two for every boss, as well as a character type number two, right? So sort of a very good follower, but a leader of the people, of larger number of people. That's a column two.
I think we can have people who have both these qualities, 1+2.
Because actually, you're exactly right. I agree. There's a very small number of people who have both, right? And those are the people who often bust through to the top. So what is the takeaway from here? That you can be as smart as you want. Yeah. If you don't have the right column, you need to be a straight out genius to be picked by people for real world success, because others have to pick you. You don't pick yourself. You're also, unless you are one of the really lucky ones, like Sergey Brin and Larry, who just built an algorithm and they became, ultra billionaires from there. Eric Schmidt ran their companies. They didn't run their company to start with. So Google's existence is owed to Eric Schmidt and someone else who's the chief operating officer was until recently the CEO of Facebook, right? It's not Brin and Larry, Sergey and Larry. So they are number one types, right? So you have to be extremely lucky to build or invent something. That's a tearaway success on its own, somewhat rare. If you have to build an organization, you have to be number two. Startup founders often have good mixes of number one and number two. Otherwise, they can't build organizations. They can either build the tools or they can either build the organization. To do both, you have to be number one. But here's some news that you can't easily become number one. You start with some core qualities and you have to train yourself to get better and better and better at it. But you could, for most part, acquire all of the qualities quite easily, almost in any stage of your life, to be number two. Dishant and Danish, yes, it's true, but there's a method to the madness. I've been around long enough that I know that beneath the politics, beneath everything else, by the way, I've worked for Mr. Ambani directly, right? And that's kind of, I'd say, an experience of a lifetime, that what does it take to be one of the top guys at Reliance? And I was very surprised to find that a lot more of it was number two than number one. And then you'd think, oh, but this is an old school organization, and therefore maybe, yeah, that's understandable. So go back to number one, an organization like Flipkart, extremely young. And I found that they too, in default, picked number two. Why? Because people who have risen to any place want other people they can trust, period. Right? So all of you would want to cultivate quality number two in spades, and which will get through the early part of your conventional life super, super fast, and be patient while getting better and better and better at number one, so that one day when your turn comes, you'll be chosen among all the number twos to be the number one. That's kind of the little moral of the story I wanted to tell. I've taken up more than my fair share of time, so let's quickly take a few questions and wrap up my talk. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm opening up Slido. It's not opening for me. Okay. We don't have any new questions, turns out.
There's only one observation, Sid, that
Yeah.
both the left and right columns sum up to 220.
Very interesting. All right. So anybody has a direct question to ask, raise your hand. Yeah, go ahead, Pragya. Hello.
I think Pragya's hand's been up before. Be harsh.
Okay.
No, I
Okay.
was waiting for the unmute permission. I was just gonna text. So, hi Siddharth, it's great to be here. Thank you for engaging with us. And your speech has been very eloquent, and I've been glued to what you're saying, which brings me to say that, okay, so I don't have a question. I just thought I wanted to discuss on the qualities of people that we were, and leaders and professionals that we were discussing. So I just wanted to talk about it. So in fact, this is one answer that I'm looking for. So, people usually are a number two where okay, I can't say usually, but there is a good group of people who are hard workers and believe in hard work over smart work. I think we could summarize the first and second columns in that manner. So the natural phenomenon that I observe is the number one, the first column is rewarded more. And in fact, even here, we're calling it the number one column, right? So is it, sometimes it makes you think, is it wrong to be a reliable person or having qualities from the second column? But having a good trade-off, as you just said, and transitioning from two to one and building that with the smartness and the skill it takes to lead a group and to make vision happen is something that we should have. So I was wondering, to have a good mix and to become a better leader, do you think experience through work and through projects, for somebody who's in the second column, having qualities from the number two, do you think experience through work and learning things and learning where you need smartness, where you need to pitch in, do you think this could improve you as a leader?
Okay, so you've asked me many questions, and to make the world simpler to everyone to understand, it's easier to speak in binaries. So, and by the way, this is the final question because our next speaker is already here, and I'll answer this. That let's simplify the world into a stage of life when you're trying to build something. You, meaning, let's say me, I'm trying to build an institution. If I have a bunch of people who are just spouting great ideas at me, I will get nowhere. And yet, I need people who understand my ideas, contribute to them, critique them, refine them. And then once we are done deciding, I go to sleep, metaphorically speaking, and they go get it done. That's a team, right? Now, obviously, all of these people also have a lot of number one qualities. Now, this starts to change when we have a large organization. In a large organization, you are not required to change anything. You're required to build a small part of, you're required to fill a role, right? That role often comes with very tight boundaries, with very little opportunity to break your boundaries. Most roles in large organizations are rather confining, unless you happen to be an editor at The Economist. I don't know. So which means that you need to be very strictly type 2 to do at least type 2. Type 1 you can be as much as you want to, but type 2 you have to be to able to succeed in a slightly larger organization. Startups are a different ballgame. Now, what do you learn along the way that improves on your oneness, number oneness, right? So first you have to have, so this is a quick one, that you don't suddenly become a thinker. It's so circumstances in your work might help you start to become a thinker. But being a thinker is a very acquired quality, which may happen naturally, but it really helps when you go into an environment that encourages this attitude. And we've all talked about US graduate schools before, and I think those environments make you very strong thinkers. So what happens when you get out of a top tier US school is you're trained to be a great thinker, a great creative and ideas person, and yet you succeed in your career because you're a great type 2 person. And then at time comes when they realize, oh my God, this guy gets stuff done, but this guy is also very smart, or this woman is very smart. And you get picked for top leadership jobs. So that's how it happens. Now, the progression, the little details are different. Like, for example, how do you become a better thinker? How do you get better and better and better at a particular craft? Those are slightly different ideas. And by the way, I have a series of upcoming talks which are meant for our internal audience, which take each one of these things and work on them. So for example, I teach people to be thinkers, like very purposeful, focused thinkers. So I don't know, maybe you can attend, but broadly, this is the answer to your question, that you don't necessarily become one type or the other type. Type 2 is easier to become. You need to be type 2 to succeed in a large company. In the early stages, and then you have to be enough type 1 to be able to switch over to being sort of large scale leader, right? So need to be both. But the bigger point I was saying, that you can very easily train to be type 1 if you got the potential. Nobody focuses on type 2, so pay attention to those qualities. Nobody can teach you how to be loyal. I don't think there's a course for loyalty out there, right? Or a course for reliability out there, or any training program for loyalty and reliability. And yet these are the things that will get you very, very far. So I think the whole point of this, 25 minutes is that do not forget, it is reliability and loyalty and being able to communicate very well on behalf of somebody and getting it done that gets you places, right? So focus on that, and obviously get smarter and smarter. Nobody's going to complain, but don't forget the second column. Thank you, everyone.